So a lot of you know me as the CEO of Fastcase, the legal research software that is a member benefit of 27 state bar associations, a few dozen voluntary bar association, and a partner with Clio, one of the first integrations with Clio into the Clio ecosystem. And I'm not here to talk to you about that. Today, I'm going to talk about the class that I teach at Georgetown Law called The Law of Robots, dealing with how we might regulate a future where software takes on an embodied form, where machines do some of the thinking for us, where people aren't the only actors, but machines are. Not in our science fiction future, but in our chaotic, messy, haven't quite figured it out present. So I'm going to start today talking about three revolutions. The first is the Industrial Revolution. Running from about 1776 to 1856 and beginning in England. The first time machines really could change the factors of production. Instead of creating things individually one by one with our hands, we use machines to create vast numbers of things. Instead of being the cobbler for Amsterdam, suddenly you could be the cobbler for all of Europe. The Industrial Revolution was a major change. It was disruptive before there was even a term for that. The biggest concern during the Industrial Revolution was that machines were going to take all of our jobs. Stop me if you've heard this. That there wouldn't be enough jobs for people because machines would create all of the shoes, all of the food, all of the everything. Turns out the exact opposite was true, right? There were so many jobs and so much labor required that we couldn't create enough people to do the work. And perversely, we ended up with this parade of horribles, right? I mean, slavery being the greatest and most obvious among them. But this period was also a time of child labor. And this was a consequence of law trailing behind the change in industry and society, right? So these were social changes and business changes and industrial changes, but there weren't legal changes that went with them. It would be like 100 years before we abolished slavery, before we enacted the first wage and hour laws, before we created weekends, before we said that you can't have children working in factories. And the consequences of law's lag in the first revolution were disastrous. I don't want to paint the Industrial Revolution as only an evil. There were obviously great things that came from it as well. People's standard of living rose. Many people rose out of poverty. It led to an American century. But I want to underscore the needless suffering that was consequence of law trailing so far behind these changes in industry and social change. The Industrial Revolution, maybe it's obvious, was a hardware revolution. It was about machines. It lasted about 220 years. The second revolution is the Information Revolution. I'm going to peg it at about 1993. It started obviously before that. But a second revolution just as profound as the Industrial Revolution. A time of globalized education where information became more and more public and free. A revolution spawned by inexpensive processing power, cheap storage, and network computers on the internet. And where the Industrial Revolution was a hardware revolution, this Information Revolution was a software revolution. It led to an age of greater globalization than ever before, the democratization of knowledge and ideas. You see things like computers that could suddenly perform operations they couldn't before. They could play chess. It led to Wikipedia, the greatest kind of font of knowledge, maybe since the library in Alexandria. Watson and many other information revolution innovations. This information revolution also gave us an unprecedented era of cat videos. new ways of watching Jersey Shore, and sharing pictures of your meals. Just as the law trailed the Industrial Revolution, law trailed this second revolution as well. So all of the law that dealt with the information revolution, that dealt with the internet, lagged behind the technology. We're living in this world right now, right? With warrantless searches, net neutrality, serious epistemological questions about whether Taco Bell is a person under an original reading of the Constitution, whether corporations can have the same rights as people. It's worth noting what powers this second revolution, and that is Moore's Law. Moore's Law was named after Intel co-founder Gordon Moore, who in 1965 hypothesized, really at the time, that the number of transistors you could fit on a chip would double about every 18 months to 2 years. The size would be cut by half, and the price would be cut by half. People thought he was a lunatic at the time. They thought there was no way that would be true. And every 5 years or so, scientists predict we are reaching the end of Moore's Law. But for the most part, it has been true since 1965. If you look here, the pink line is the kind of hypothesized path of Moore's Law. And then the red line shows the kind of storage and memory power. And the yellow line shows the speed of computer processors over that long period of time. And it's pretty incredible. I mean, for the most part, Moore's Law has held true. For those of you who are math and science geeks in the room, any math and science geeks, you may notice that the y-axis here isn't like a linear 10, 20, 30 axis, right? It's exponential, 10, 100, 1,000, 10,000, and that will become important in just a second. So we are now entering into a third revolution, and it's really the uniting of the first two, the robotic revolution. The first time that intelligent software takes on a physical hardware embodiment. Smarter machines that perform harder tasks, and in some cases, better than we ourselves do. The robotic revolution is poised to be every bit as big as the information revolution and the robotic revolution, and that's what we're going to talk about today. This isn't a tech talk. I'm not going to code a robot or dance the robot or any of that stuff. It's the beginning of a conversation about how we govern as we get further into this 21st century. Okay, 3 revolutions: industrial, information, and robotic. Now, I know what many of you are thinking. This guy's out of his mind. Right? Robot law sounds like a class for dilettantes or worse. We don't need to have like a law school class to deal with GoPros on the bottom of a helicopter, right? That's not anything special. It sounds like something out of science fiction, out of our flying car future. It's not. Robots aren't our future at all. They are absolutely 100% our present. If you go into an auto manufacturing plant, most of auto production today is done by machines. The Tesla factory in Reno, Elon Musk is fond of saying, actually doesn't need lights. The machines know where everything is, whether there's lights on or not. There are people in the plant. Most of what the people do is pick up screws. Right? If the machines drop something, they'll pick it up and put it back in the bucket. But for the most part, 249 robots in the plant do the entire work. Some of our most precise surgical techniques are done by robots, like the Da Vinci robot. If you know someone who has had prostate cancer surgery in the last 5 years or so, chances are very good it was done either primarily or assisted by a Da Vinci robot. We police our borders and kill enemy combatants with drones. This keeps our boots off the ground. And Uber's self-driving cars are already on the roads in Pittsburgh. This just launched last week. This wasn't like a long phase-in. This was like, on Monday, there are no self-driving cars. On Tuesday, there are self-driving cars on the road in Pittsburgh. Uber has a way of really sticking it to people. How many of you have seen a self-driving car, by the way, in the wild? Okay, a few of you. I saw my first a few years ago in San Francisco, where the 101 between Palo Alto and San Francisco is like lousy with self-driving cars, right? So this was early. This was like 2012. I grew up in Louisiana, as many of you know, and I saw my first Google self-driving car on the road. I immediately turned into my 15-year-old self in Louisiana, right? So I'm in this lane. There's a Google self-driving car in that lane. There's a geek from Google in the front seat, making a big show to a bunch of venture capitalists or something about how he's, not touching the steering wheel, right? He's talking with his hands, he's carrying on a conversation, turning around. So I wondered to myself, hey, I wonder how good this car is. I started easing over into the lane. The car was awesome. It was handled itself perfectly. I pulled in front of it, broke erratically, kind of pulled out of the lane. I tailgated it for a few miles. It kept speeding up and changing lanes. The car handled itself beautifully. The guy from Google, not so much. Quite good, though. A few years ago, the opening kickoff of the World Cup was kicked off by a guy who was a quadriplegic who walked out onto the field with a robotic exoskeleton. Couldn't move his arms or his legs, but he stood up, walked onto the field and kicked a soccer ball, controlled the exoskeleton completely with his mind. And if you fly, most of your flight is handled by autopilot, which is nothing more than a self-flying airplane. We're so afraid of self-driving cars, but every day we get into flights that humans aren't even touching. I mean, it used to be the case that pilots would only operate during takeoff and landing. And then in the middle, they'd play cards, they'd update software, they would, just kind of hang out in the cockpit while the plane flew itself. Well, now there's auto takeoff and auto land programs. So the pilots really aren't even doing anything during takeoff and landing anymore. Okay, so I could go on and on about this. Quietly, robots are all around us. The autonomous systems in our lives are getting better and faster, and they need us less and less. It's an interesting testament to how prevalent these machines are in our lives that we don't even see them anymore. We kind of just take them for granted. Even in your manual piloted car, there's all kinds of autonomous systems. If you slam on the brakes, software decides how quickly the brakes pulse instead of just locking up your brakes. We don't even think about that, right? But that's software. These machines in our lives are getting smarter and faster. Remember what I said before about Moore's Law? This is Moore's Law on a linear graph, a 10, 20, 30, 40 graph. We normally think about growth of things along the red line. People get smarter in this kind of linear way. But Moore's Law follows the green line. To illustrate the importance and that difference, I'll tell a story in a minute, but you sort of think about how we learn and machines learn, and you have to wonder how long before they are smarter than we are. So brain scientists think that in order to perform the kinds of things that a human brain does, a computer would have to have an exaflop processor. This is how you measure chip speed, how many theoretical floating point operations or flops per second a computer would do. And in order to perform the kinds of tasks that a human brain does, a computer would have to have 1 billion floating point operations per second, 10 to the 18th power. Today's biggest computers register somewhere south of 40 petaflops. That's 10 to the 15th power. In order for our fastest, biggest computers today to reach that exaflop status, they'd have to get about 100,000 times more powerful than they are today. I take great comfort in this, by the way. The Terminator robots are still a little ways off. Right now, our biggest, best machines have about the processing power of a rat's brain. That's about where we are. Not good news for rat employment, by the way. The scary thing about this is that following Moore's Law, we are expected to reach exaflop processing power sometime in 2019. Right? This is not impossibly far off, this is a couple of calendar quarters away, right? Like we're budgeting for 2018 right now, right? That's the world that we're going to be living in very shortly. And then immediately after that, right, in like 2026, a single computer will have more processing power than everyone who has ever lived combined on one machine. So that's kind of sobering. To underscore how near this is, I want to tell you a story about Watson's grandfather, a computer called Deep Thought. So Deep Thought started as a computer science experiment at Carnegie Mellon University. It was two grad students named Feng-Sheng Xu and Murray Campbell. And they were going to build a chess-playing computer in 1988. There were chess-playing computers in the world, and they were okay, but the best chess-playing people, the grandmasters of chess, could always beat the machines. They could figure the machines' tricks out and then whip them, right? It wasn't even close. So Campbell and Xu said, look, we think we can build a better chess-playing computer, and we're going to challenge one of the grandmasters to a contest. And they didn't want to challenge just any grandmaster. They challenged Garry Kasparov, the greatest player in the history of chess. If you don't know Garry Kasparov, he is kind of like the Michael Jordan or like the LeBron James of chess. Okay? He was the best player in the world, and he let everyone know that. If you want to know how good he was, you could just ask him. He was unbeaten in match play from 1986 to 2005. And so they challenged Garry Kasparov, who gladly took the invitation. And they played in 1988, and he crushed their computer. He ate it alive. His quote afterwards was typically arrogant. He said, "One day they will invent a computer that it takes 100% of my faculties to beat, but it probably won't be in my lifetime." So Xu and Campbell lost, and they lost badly. But what happened next is what's important. So IBM saw this, and they knew all about Moore's Law, and they could see which way the direction was pointing. So IBM hired Campbell and Xu and said, come in-house and work with us. Build your chess-playing computer inside of IBM, and we'll see what we can do with it. You know, maybe one day we can build a computer that can beat a grandmaster in chess. So they worked at IBM for 8 years. And in 1996, they challenged Garry Kasparov to a rematch, 6 games. And over those 6 games, Kasparov handily won 5 out of the 6. They played him to a draw for like one of the games, which was historic in its own right, but Kasparov handily won. So imagine his surprise when 1 year later, in 1997, they challenged him to a rematch. And Kasparov at the time said, look, of course I'll take your match, but you had 8 years to build this thing, right? How much better do you think it's going to get in 1 year? Well, the answer was much better. In 1997, Garry Kasparov took the first game of a 6-game match, and that match was historic because it was the last time that the best human chess player in the world could beat the best machine chess player in the world. Deep Blue, the offspring of Deep Thought, won Game 2. They played games 3 through 5 to a draw, where Kasparov was on the run the whole time. He eked out a draw in those games, but he was visibly drawn the entire time. And then in Game 6, every bit as badly as Kasparov had beaten Deep Blue in the games before, Deep Blue beat Kasparov, thumped him. Wasn't even close. How did this happen? Well, I think Kasparov's mistake, if you can call it a mistake, was he was thinking along this red line. How much better could Deep Blue get in 1 year? Well, on the red line, not very far. But on the green line, if you're over here, the machine starts getting much better, much faster, to the point where it gets almost infinitely better every single year. So Kasparov either misunderstood Moore's Law and the exponential growth of machines, or misunderstood where we are on the curve. We all know what happened next. Deep Blue spawned Watson, another IBM project, which defeated Ken Jennings and Brad Rutter in 2011. It was a showcase project. No one was sure that it would win the first time around. It would probably be like the first match against Kasparov. And yet it did win, and handily, in that very first match. And people thought there was reason to be skeptical, right? Jeopardy isn't like chess, where there's mechanical, mathematical rules, where through brute force computation, you can just kind of figure out all the end moves in chess. Jeopardy uses linguistics, puns, plays on words. How could a computer possibly figure that out? And yet, it did. So now doctors are using Watson to build telemedicine apps. Law firms are starting to use Watson to build legal apps. In fact, I see Andrew Arruda here from Ross Intelligence. People are using software to build, using Watson to build legal software as well, applying artificial intelligence in the field of legal research and law. Let me introduce you to your new law firm, Watson LLC. We're not quite here today. We're actually kind of here. It's still like 1998. Our smartest, fastest computers have the processing power of a kitten's brain, not even like a wily cat, like still a cute, adorable, naive kitten. Our best lawyers can crush computers at most legal tasks. But just like the deep thought computer of 1998 and like IBM, we can see what's coming. We know how Moore's law works. We know what ends up here. We know how the story ends. Now, some of you may have a background in this, right? If you've studied artificial intelligence or you know how it works, you say maybe something like, look, we know how the story goes also, which is over and over again. We get inflated expectations. We get to a point where we think that artificial intelligence is going to replace us all. And then we try to apply it to tasks of broad applicability, and it fails us. And then we're disappointed. This has been the whole history of artificial intelligence. In fact, we've done this exact pattern 3 times since the Dartmouth Conference in 1956 that started the field of artificial intelligence. By the way, artificial intelligence isn't a thing, right? It's not like a software program or something else. It describes a whole field of computer science, of machine learning, a whole bunch of different applications that machines use to replace the outputs of human thought, but by a different path, right? So you can have machine learning read over data and reach kinds of the same editorial conclusions that you might through human effort, but doing it only with machines. I'll give you one good example of this. At Fastcase, we've been working on something called Bad Law Bot. And the idea behind Bad Law Bot is that today, our best editorial citators are human editorial citators. Shepardson Keysight, they're kind of the gold standard. And our gold standard has about a documented 67% accuracy rate, right? If you run cases on both services, Shepardson Keysight actually disagree with each other all the time. Our hypothesis is that using machine learning, intelligent algorithms, iteratively, machines could actually produce more accurate outputs to tell whether a case is still good law than human editorial work. You know, machines don't come to work sick. They don't have sick kids or mortgages to worry about. They don't have bad days. And if the algorithm doesn't work very well, you can tweak it, make it work better, run it again. They can continue to improve over time. That one bad day the editor had in Minnesota in 1956 where, you know, she just missed a case, didn't see that one overturned the other, and then that is sort of left in the books forever. Isn't the way software works. You can rerun a better algorithm, a better machine learning algorithm that will improve those results over time. And not just for today's cases, but all the way back. So why do we think that we're not going to get into this trough of disillusionment again in 2017 or 2018? I'll give you 2 good reasons. One is processing power. Our machines are just better and more capable of handling machine learning tasks than they ever have been before. The second reason may even be more compelling, and that is that we have more data to feed the machines than we ever had before. In the past, when we've tried to build artificial intelligence applications, we've had very limited data sets, whatever humans could sort of key into the machines. Well, now we have the internet. We have the World Wide Web. We have vast stores of information. And with this unprecedented amount of information that we spawned during this second information revolution, we can develop machine learning algorithms that will learn better and more powerfully than ever, hopefully leading us to the plateau of profitability, or let's just call it the plateau of competence, right? Where machines actually can do some of the things that people can do. Okay, so our machines can't outthink us yet. They are still kitten brains or rat brains, but soon they'll have more processing power than we do. And then there won't be like a long period where they're sort of on par with us, right? It'll be like a second. Because as soon as they have as much processing power as we do, we'll say, oh my gosh, I can't believe that, and they'll be smarter, right? By the time we finish the sentence, they'll be smarter than us, and immediately after, much smarter than us. This is not like a 2030 issue, right? This is a 2018, 2019, 2020 issue, not for our grandkids, but for us. And unlike Gary Kasparov, we can see where the red line and the green line cross. So this transition, where machines are smarter than we are, could be really scary, or it could be really great. And which of those worlds it is will depend in large part about how big of a lag we have between this industrial, informational, robotic, social change and our law. How quickly our law can catch up might be the big decider between whether we live in a world free of scarcity, a world of abundance, a world where we are all taken care of better and where we are lifted out of poverty and ignorance, or a horrible dystopian nightmare. Could be up to us. Could be just a matter of law. So let's talk about that law. How do we regulate robots? How does our law deal with this impending vast social change? This third revolution is something that we deal with over the next couple of years, but we'll be dealing with it with our law, much of which was designed in our past, and a lot of it in our very distant past. If you think about it, during our second revolution, we asked questions like, is Google a common carrier? Common carrier is dealing with like railroad cars, right? This is the way we use law. We apply the law of the past to acts of the future, and sometimes it's stuff from our very distant past. So to answer questions in this third revolution, we might look to our experience in the second revolution. What can we learn from our experience of trying to regulate cyberspace and the internet over the last 10, 20 years? And what does that teach us about how to do it better when we deal with our robotic revolution over the next 5 to 10 years? And there was a great moment for this, actually, right here in Chicago, about 10 miles south of here at the University of Chicago. When I was a plucky 3L there was the first conference on cyberspace in 1996, brand new, very forward-thinking, and really, like, it was the first browsers were just getting off the ground. There wasn't even really much of a World Wide Web to see. We had email and like the very first seeds of the World Wide Web. The internet seemed very novel and very new. And the University of Chicago held this cyberspace law conference. And the keynote speaker on the first day was Judge Frank Easterbrook. And his keynote basically, by the way, in person, his beard is every bit as majestic. On the first day of this conference, he says, in his Frank Easterbrook way, so many of you are coming here to this conference on the law of cyberspace with the idea that you will create the laws for this new time of cyberspace. And I'm going to encourage you not to do that. Because we don't need new law for every new thing in the world. We are very proud here at the University of Chicago that we don't have a class called the law of the horse. We apply tort law or carriage law to horses, the laws of animals, laws that we already have. You don't need a law of X or Y or Z every time we have a new X or Y or Z. And for those of you who don't take my admonition and who still want to create a law of cyberspace, let me encourage you, don't, because you will get it wrong, as you always do. Get off my lawn. So the inaugural conference on cyberspace, and Judge Easterbrook dumps a giant bucket of cold water over the entire conference. People were shell-shocked. I think they awkwardly, politely clapped as he left the stage. So the keynoter for the second day was a young law professor there named Larry Lessig. And Professor Lessig gave a talk and later wrote a paper called What Cyber Law Might Teach. And the point of his talk and his article was, sure, Judge Easterbrook is right. That's what common law does. You always apply existing law to new facts. Common law grows over time. However, sometimes the new facts are so new that we have to create exceptions. Sometimes the new facts are so exceptionally different that when you apply the old law to the new facts, you get the outcome completely wrong. And he gave a couple of examples. He said, in the real world, if a 10-year-old goes to 7-Eleven to try to buy a six-pack of beer, the clerk at 7-Eleven says, you're a 10-year-old kid. You can't buy beer. But on the internet, no one knows you're a 10-year-old kid. The real world has a self-authenticating feature here. You can tell who someone is. But that's not true on the internet. There is no kind of self-authentication on the internet. And so if you apply the laws that apply to like a 7-Eleven purchase of liquor online and just required someone to certify that they are 18, people can very easily bypass that on the internet. And so you might need a new mode of regulation on the internet. Maybe it's through law, maybe it's through markets, maybe it's through architecture and code, maybe it's through social norms, but you can't do it the way you used to do it. The internet is so exceptionally different that you need a new set of laws for these facts. And that became known as exceptionalism. So legal academics would talk about whether new facts are so sufficiently exceptionally different that you need to create a new body of law. And the question became, is cyberspace exceptional? Where are things so different on cyberspace that we need new laws to regulate these new facts? Is cyberspace exceptional, or is it just another horse? Well, that's the central question. And that's what we ask in my class at Georgetown. Are robots exceptional? When our software takes on a hardware embodiment, when it moves in space around us, do we need to have a new set of laws? When machines act as our agents, when they do things for us, do we need to have a different set of laws, or can we rely on old agency law? Are machines that take on this software embodiment in the real world so exceptionally different that we need a new set of laws? And the answer, of course, is never, yes, robots are exceptional, right? You look at them sort of one at a time. You take each different set of facts and try to figure out what happens if you apply existing common law in this world. Do we like the outcome or not? And it's interesting, too, because the class has to examine the values behind our existing law. You have to figure out what we're trying to do in an auto accident. When someone is hurt through no fault of their own, why do we have a negligent driver compensate the innocent victim? Right? Is it to restore the person to where they were before the accident? Is it to punish negligent behavior? Is it supposed to be a deterrent to other people who might drink and drive? And then you have to measure what happens when you apply these laws into a new world. Do you get the same kind of values preserved, or are they undermined? And that's the real central question behind exceptionalism. So let me give you an example. Our tort law. I just mentioned auto accidents. Auto accidents are premised on the idea that we compensate people for these injuries when someone is negligently hurts them. And the idea, the central idea of tort law as that mechanism is that someone is at fault. Someone makes a mistake, someone acts negligently, If they don't, there won't be an injury. Well, we're coming into a world where self-driving cars, where software might inevitably cause an accident, but totally without fault, where the car is designed well, where the software knows exactly what to do, where the software performs every single thing we would want it to do, and nonetheless there is an unavoidable accident and someone is hurt. Now, if we apply the principles of tort law here, we're not going to like the outcome, right? The person who is hurt through no fault of their own doesn't get compensated in this world because there is no negligence. Tort law as a mechanism for making this person whole again kind of falls on its face. So there's a lot of scholars who are saying now, in a self-driving car world, we may have to create like a no-fault insurance scheme. So everyone would pay a little premium on their insurance, but we'd have many fewer car accidents. 30,000, 40,000 automobile fatalities every year just in the United States. So we might drive that number down to 3,000 a few years from now, 300 a few years after that. There'll be many fewer fatalities, but we'll still have 500, 300 people a year who are hurt. How do we compensate them? How do we make them whole? Well, there should be enough insurance gains through a safer system that we could compensate them out of the insurance pool. So a no-fault insurance mechanism for making people whole is a completely different scheme. We have nothing like this today. Today we use tort law. But we might say that self-driving cars are exceptional in exactly this way. If we apply existing tort principles to self-driving cars, it undermines our goals of making people whole, those values of protecting innocent people and restoring them to their lives as best we can, paying for their care. So if we want to protect that value, we might have to have a change in law. And by the way, the software that's going to power these self-driving cars doesn't have any regulation at all, right? Maybe a product's liability or something, but there's no regulation that says, here's the kinds of choices we want this software to make. There's no way to enforce those values in the software that operates the cars, right? So many of you have heard the trolley car problem, but imagine your self-driving car is pulling onto a bridge and there's going to be an accident. Not really anyone's fault, but you have two nuns on the side of the road. You have a school bus full of innocent and adorable kids approaching in the opposite direction, and the person driving the self-driving car. Now, the car can pull off the road and kill the driver. It can swerve and hit these two nuns, or it could run into the school bus, threatening the lives of the kids. This is kind of a famous problem, but I want to illustrate something here with it. We don't have any way of answering that question. We don't have a way of telling Google what the software should do in that situation. Whose life should we save? If you look at it from like kind of a societal perspective, we probably want to save the most lives, right? We want to cause the fewest number of fatalities we possibly can. That probably means sacrificing the life of the driver. On the other hand, if you build software that sacrifices the life of the driver, who is going to buy that car? Not me, right? So it hampers innovation if we choose the life of the driver. Now, maybe you say, look, the school bus full of kids are so innocent, maybe we should hit the nuns, but they are nuns. I mean, so you can see right away, not only is it kind of an ethical and moral problem, but there's no really good way of answering it. It is like the self-driving car's Kobayashi Maru. There is no really good answer to this question. But I say it not to point out the moral quandary this poses. I want to say, what's Google supposed to do? They will build software that has to answer the question somehow, and they will maximize one of those values, maybe. But right now, they're not required to maximize any of those values. So actually, Google is a public company. Maybe their only real legal mandate is to maximize shareholder value. Now, I don't mean this facetiously, but in this field, they might have to kill the person who is least valuable to Google shareholders. Right? I mean, if these nuns run a website that gets a lot of clicks, I mean this facetiously, right? But there's no guidance for Google as to what societal value of those we want to promote. There's no really good answer to that question. And in the absence of that, Google can make that decision anyhow they want. And right now, in Palo Alto and Mountain View, California, software developers are doing exactly that without any guidance from us, without any policy guidance or moral or ethical guidance. They're deciding who in this field is going to live or die. And in our robotic future, all kinds of software decisions will have to be made by coders without deep philosophical underpinnings to really make these decisions. And what's worse, our law doesn't give them any guidance or any answers for how to do that. So for criminal law, when robots commit crimes, something as simple as speeding, for example, or something as complex as actually killing someone, how can we apply criminal law to a machine? It doesn't even make sense, right? In criminal law in the US, in the common law tradition, right, you have the actus reus and the mens rea. You have to commit the crime, and then you have to have the requisite mental state to be convicted of the crime. It doesn't make any sense, right? Machines can't have any kind of mens rea. So if we apply our existing criminal law and common law and statutory law in this world of new facts where machines will commit these crimes, the outcomes really won't punish anyone. When a self-driving car speeds, maybe there's no one even in it. Who should pay for that? Should the owner of the car pay for that? Should the hardware manufacturer pay? Should the person who designed the software pay? We don't really know. If a robot commits a crime, you say, go buy me the New York Times, and the machine kills somebody with a door to the newsstand. Are you responsible? Or do you hold the machine responsible because you just said go buy the New York Times? What would that even mean? Would we build like a robotic jail? I mean this kind of facetiously. People are actually proposing this right now. Would robots even care? I mean, put a machine in jail for 5 years, power it down for 5 years, you power it back up after 5 years, and it's like, okay, like nothing happened, right? I mean, in a way, these machines could be immortal. They're not going to die. What's 5 years to an immortal? But do we even have a frame of reference for figuring out how we would treat criminal law for a machine? No. Will machines commit crimes? Yes, probably in 2017. We've already had software like buy things off the black market illegally. What do we do? No one knows. By the way, if a machine did commit a crime, how would you bring it to justice? Robots are pretty dangerous little things, as illustrated by the fact that the Dallas police just killed someone a sniper, right, by wheeling a robot in with a bomb, blowing up the bomb. How would you bring a machine like that to justice? It could be booby-trapped. It could be heavily armed. Will you have to have like a RoboCop police force to bring robots to justice? When machines create music, do they deserve a copyright? Or if there's a copyright that issues, who gets it? Is it the person who owns the hardware, or the person who wrote the software? Is it in a license agreement somewhere? Does nobody at all get a copyright on that music? Who owns it? The copyright example may seem a little bit esoteric, but actually there are machines that create music right now. It's terrible, but candidly not much more terrible than a lot of human-made music. There's a program called Emily Watson that is creating kind of synthesized music, and it is indistinguishable from terrible human music. If you buy Emily Watson software and write a symphony with it, can anyone rip it off from you? Or is that something special that you own? Or does the inventor of Emily Watson own it? If you read baseball articles in the newspaper, or if you read business articles about stock performance on Yahoo, about 90% of the time, those are being written by software today. There's a company called Narrative Sciences that can read the box score and write a complete article about the ball game in a second, right? It's instant. They read the 10 Qs and the 10 Ks coming out of companies in the Valley, and then they write a business article about the performance of the company for Yahoo News. Now, when that happens, can I rip that off and sell it on my website? I shouldn't say that. I actually have a website. But could one rip that off and just sell it in a different form? Or does someone actually have a copyright on that Narrative Sciences written article? And if so, who? I don't think we really know. Okay, so these are hard questions, and they obviously don't have easy answers. Are robots exceptional? Sometimes. Sometimes we can just apply common law to these thinking machines and reach an outcome that we like. And sometimes when we apply existing law to these machines, we will hate the outcome. It will be completely counterintuitive. So sometimes they'll be exceptional and sometimes they won't. The hard work is figuring out when to apply existing property law or criminal law or tort law, and when new laws will be needed. By the way, I think a lurking question here is, are we going to lose all of our jobs? And I think the answer is no one knows, right? We have the Industrial Revolution to look to. People have said over a couple of these revolutions, all of our jobs will be lost. And our experience tells us that oftentimes there are new jobs, not the same jobs, but new jobs creating, writing software, servicing machines, making sure that they are compliant and not hacked. But who knows? Will there be as many of those jobs as there were jobs before? Will we even be able to do those jobs? Truly, no one knows. And the law will definitely play a part in figuring out whether we do or not. But I think that there's no guarantee that there will be enough jobs in this revolution, or that we'll be facing any scarcity at all. We might be reaching an era of unprecedented employment. But this time really could be different. Okay, so these aren't issues for 2030. They're issues for 2016, 2017, 2018. Many of our laws are going to have to change, and fast. But how? Another lurking question in this is, who is going to do this kind of regulation? If you have states who are regulating machines, you'll have different laws in every state. When you drive across the border from Illinois to Wisconsin, are you going to have to change your software to accommodate the different laws in every state? If we have a national scheme, many of those laws will be written by Congress. So it's time to start asking these questions and fast. I lost my colophon. So you can imagine a last slide here that says colophon. Maybe the machines are listening. You see, they just heal themselves so fast. Okay, here's my colophon. This third revolution, the robotic revolution, uniting the hardware revolution of the industrial revolution and the software revolution of the information revolution of the internet, brought together in this robotic revolution. Is this a reason to be hopeful, or is it a reason to despair? I'm kind of an optimist. I am really hopeful. There's lots of reasons to be hopeful, but one of the reasons I'm hopeful is that over the last 30 or 40 years, North America lost a lot of jobs, manufacturing jobs in particular, but all kinds of jobs. Globalization made work move to the place in the world where it could be done least expensively. As the transaction costs of moving things across the world lowered, the work moved to the place in the world where it could be done least expensively by people. But in this robotic revolution, there is every reason to believe that our machines can do this work less expensively than anywhere else in the world. And a lot of the hard work in robotics and artificial intelligence is happening right here in North America. It's Canada and the United States. The research universities are some of the best in the world. The best and brightest thinkers in the world are coming here to the United States and to Canada to do this work. But there's a problem because, at least in the United States, when people are done with these degrees, when they've done the research, when they've spun themselves up, we tend to send them back home, right? But if we can create a hotbed of innovation, have people come here to learn and stay here to innovate, then we really could be on the cusp of a new American century where many of these jobs come back, great jobs. And we could be right on the cusp of an era of diminished poverty, of diminished scarcity, an era of abundance. Andrew Arruda is going to be giving a talk about artificial intelligence and all of its promise tomorrow, and I would encourage you to go watch that. But I think we really could be on the cusp of a time where machines help us to be even bigger than ourselves, to have an outsized impact on our future in a way that we never have been able to before. So this new American century really could be our future if we make it, if we act fast enough, if we don't create a giant lag between these massive changes in industry, in software, in hardware, in robotics, in culture. If our laws are able to catch up to these changes and in time, this could be our newest American century if we make it. And that's the conversation that we have today. Thank you.